Hello and welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM and on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Joining us this week is a returning guest, Ali Harvey, founder of the Collaborative Town Centre Health Check Programme within the Heritage Council. And we've spoken to Ali before in the context of urban regeneration, rural regeneration, and of course, placemaking in the broadest sense, where we're really communicating with the community. Ali, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, great to be back.
Ali, you and I overlap on so many topics, you know, particularly around placemaking. And I think, you know, at the heart of all, you know, planning, construction, real estate conversations are the communities. And sometimes that's not, I suppose, represented enough. So you might just talk people through what is, I mentioned you're the founder of the Collaborative Town Centre Health Check Programme within the Heritage Council. You might just explain what that programme is and why it's important.
Okay, so the programme really, I suppose, business leaders started to come to me in 2016. The first person to come to me was Tara Buckley from RG Data, and we met at a conference actually, and she said, Ali, can you help with the town centres? You know, we really need some help. And I suppose my background, I was in the private sector for 9 years. So I kind of was thinking, well, okay, well, if the private sector and the business leaders need help, like it's obviously true, do you know what I mean? So I kind of just set about trying to set up a program that would help town centres, historic town centres. But in that first year, I didn't actually have any budget. So then I started to approach the universities, the academics, the ITs, you know, now the TUs, whatever. So, and asked those people to work with me, and then created a 15-step methodology. So that's our phase one baseline methodology, 15 steps. So all the towns, you know, use the same methodology, which means that we are able to compare and contrast the results. So yeah, it was very much the business leaders at the start. And then I suppose about 2 years in, 3 years in, maybe the local authorities started to come on board. Then we started in 2019, the programme started to advocate for a town centre first policy. So I put in a policy submission to the Louth County Development Plan calling for town centres first, that we needed that policy in the country. And it seems kind of weird now thinking we didn't actually have a policy for town centres, you know, in the country, a national policy. So that was great. And then that was included in the programme for government in 2020, TCF, and also the CTCHC programme. So I think we're on pages 12 and 13. So yeah, I have 15 towns in the programme, and I have a waiting list of over 50 towns to come into phase one. So it's a 4-phase programme. And really, you know, at the minute, we're just trying to look at funding opportunities with Europe and stuff like that. So very exciting.
It is exciting, but it's so necessary. And you mentioned there that it's strange or weird that we didn't have a town centre programme. But yet, if you look at our towns over the past 20 to 30 years, I think it's very obvious we didn't have a programme where we have retail centres and huge sprawling car parks on the outskirts of towns and on ring roads. And the insides, you know, within the town centre is being lost, and particularly after 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, you know, there's no activity. Let's just kind of go back almost to the start there. You know, you mentioned it's a 15-step methodology. How do you bring towns? Each town is so unique in terms of character, culture, heritage, and size, and educational and work opportunities. How do you bring them? How do you design a methodology that will work for, you know, kind of a small town in County Clare or a large town that is essentially within the commuter belt of Dublin?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question in terms of the scale. So, you know, I suppose the towns, because as I say, the lack of funding at the start, I sort of focus on the larger towns. Then Tipperary, you know, there was one town, Tipperary town, where they actually marched in the streets. So I got a phone call from one of the ministers and asked would I help with that. So we set up a CTCHC project in Tipperary town. So, and that was around the same time as the task force, Tipperary task force was set up. So yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting sort of, you know, what I would recommend for the smaller towns is that they should be done in clusters. So, you know, I've got Dundalk, which is a large town, 40,000 plus. I'm just about to start in Drogheda. We're just about to publish Killrush. We've got Sligo, Letterkenny. Yeah, different population sizes. But I suppose, you know, really what we do need to do is to try and get those large towns, like the 2 towns. I mean, Drogheda has waited over 2 years for a CTCHC, and we did Kilkenny last year. So Kilkenny was published in December with Malcolm Noonan. And also those 2 towns, Drogheda and Dundalk, are on, you know, an EU trade route. But I suppose my the west of Ireland is really struggling. So it was to try and sort of pick up that western seaboard. And again, when I was starting out with the program, I tried to sort of, pitch it and position it for Europe. So we were looking at the border towns, because Brexit was obviously, had just been voted for in England and Wales. And we were trying to make sure that those towns along the border, Dundalk, Letterkenny, Sligo, Ballyshannon, had their baselines, and it's really, really important that we have that, so that, we can sort of deal with those shocks, those external shocks that had nothing to do with our country as such. And as I say, Killrush, now we're going to be publishing that in the next few weeks. I'm just doing the peer review of the land use survey, which is step 2 of the 15 steps. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult because obviously, the resources, we've got to make sure that we, are value for money, that we deliver all the time, which the program, it's operating on a shoestring at the minute. And it really needs investment under the program for government. But yeah, definitely clusters, that kind of, a network. I'm looking as well very much towards Scotland, Denmark, Holland. What are they doing? So like in Scotland, they've got their Scotland's Towns Partnership. We don't have that organisation in Ireland. It was something that I recommended at their Oireachtas in January 2022, was that Ireland needs like an Ireland's Towns Partnership that would help everybody sort of learn and share together, and would also bring, the relationship, the partnership that we've created with the CTCHC, with the private sector and the public sector all working together. Like, that's the future. It isn't going to work unless we have the private sector in there working with the public sector.
Jo, I'm so glad you've made that point, because a lot of regeneration initiatives seem to be public sector led, and there isn't a great effort. While there might be some effort to bring the community, I would argue not enough of an effort to bring the community along with them, but there's almost zero effort to bring the private sector business community along with them, that we absolutely need. And in fact, I can point to some regeneration and placemaker projects that we've been involved in where that was absolutely part of maybe the downfall of it. So we're not good. And I suppose the clue is in the title. Your program starts with collaborative. So the clue is in the title. It is about collaboration. But I think in practice, we haven't been very good at it. I think we're very good in placemaking at saying all the right buzzwords, doing the nice program releases, doing the nice brochures. But actually, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of working together, I don't think we've cracked that between the public and private sector at all. And I say that as somebody who's been involved in it for a decade and a half. I think it's something we do quite poorly. You mentioned Scotland Towns Partners. Sorry, I'm not familiar with that. What
Scotland's Towns Partnership, yeah. It's actually run by an Irish guy. So yeah, I mean, we have a great sort of, another thing that I've set up is an Irish Towns diaspora network to try and identify the Irish people, good, great Irish people who are working abroad, who we can sort of, again, piggyback off. So yeah, I'd agree with you, in terms of the private sector. I mean, I have 2 dissertations, going back, whatever, to my undergrad and postgrad days, looking at how you do regeneration and how you do empowerment and partnership. So I would agree with you. I mean, I think the opportunity, the exciting thing for me is trying to create those partnerships, where you get value and you add value, and you're trying to create a richness to the system. I mean, it's about process. It's not about sort of getting from A to B as quickly as you can. It's getting to A to B, building and creating capacity and knowledge, and sharing knowledge, and making sure that whatever public spending, whatever monies that you're spending from the public purse, have value. I mean, my background's economics. There's absolutely no way we should be spending money unless it's of value. So it's about value for money, VFM.
And it sounds good when you talk about creating partnerships, and I think anybody who's done that successfully knows it's challenging. But it's challenging when you're creating partnerships from the ground up. But actually, in a lot of these areas, it's much more complicated than from the ground up, because actually there's a history to it. There has been maybe decades of breaches of trust between, whether it's the policymakers, the placemaking side, the public sector, or the private sector. And we see it across mistrust across the industry, mistrust in our planning process. And so actually starting from scratch is difficult, but it would be easier than starting from a place where there's been poor placemaking, where there's been failed promises, where there's been failed
very much
delivery.
So. Yeah, Carol, I mean, like those sort of damaged relationships, I'm thinking of Tipperary Town, where they marched in the streets, 5,000 people, and then I got a phone call asking would I help, and I'm still working with Tipperary, haven't left them. I'm very fond of the civic and business leaders down there. And I mean, I suppose as well, it's about getting people like myself and others, people who care, on who want to do the hard slog. And I mean, you know, sort of rebuilding communities or helping communities, supporting communities, and that includes the business leaders. It's not easy, you know, so I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. And yes, there are some towns that are, as I say, good to go. You know, it's really, really important that those towns realize that they need to come together, that those leaders, you know, you need to find young people that will be leaders in the future to try and be sustainable. Part of my belief about sustainability is that we must bring on young people. So, I mean, that's one of the core things of the programme, which actually was a necessity at the start due to a lack of funding, but is now part of our USP because we work with the students and they're telling us what they want. Young people, you know, they're saying they don't want a car, they want to live in town centres, they want to be able to walk everywhere. And that gives me hope, you know, but yeah, definitely it's not easy. And I think sometimes maybe policymakers don't actually understand because they're not in the trenches with us. You know, that's always been, as I say, going back to my postgrad days, community empowerment takes time, and to me it's a craft. You know, you have to sit down and listen. And it's funny because one of the ministers asked me, you know, what do you do when you go into a town? And I said I would spend the first 3 months listening to people, listening. You know, what do you need? How can I help you? And not telling people what to do, but just sitting. And also part of that involves maybe sitting with somebody who's very upset, who, you know, has had a very bad experience with planning. And it's all about trying to sort of make sure that we can get over that they're given a voice, that they can sort of lance that boil and get on, and we can help them. I can help them move on. But I mean, that is fundamental. You have to be realistic. There are problems there in the past that need to be addressed. One of the things that I do with the projects that, you know, I set up, we, you know, I made sure that we have a rotating chair. So when we have a steering group every month, it's a different chair. And that really helps with the team spirit, you know. So we would have the credit unions, we'd have the Leo office. You know, if we're lucky enough to have a bid in the town, it would be the manager of the bid. And then as well, Carol, you know, and I suppose it goes back to when we were all at school playing in teams, you know, if we're lucky enough to play a lot of sports, it's, you know, I insist that we all go for lunch afterwards, you know, so there's a team lunch. But as I say, it's a rotating chair. So it's interesting because even with Tipperary, they sort of said to me, are you going to come in and sort of chair this? And I was like, no, I'm going to come in and facilitate and do capacity building. And every time we meet, there will be somebody else will be enabled to have a voice at this table.
You know, I love that you've prioritized listening, because it is such I think maybe it's one of the tokenistic elements of some of our regulatory public consultation or statutory public consultation. And I remember a number of years ago when I was doing some research around this and trying to, I suppose, find innovative ways that we could use technology to engage communities. One of the books I read was by a guy, David, I think it's Ausberger, and he had this beautiful quote which really struck with me, and it said that being heard is so close to the feeling of being loved that for most people it's indistinguishable. So actually, if you can really make people feel like they've been heard, they feel like they've been loved. And that sounds like a stretch in placemaking, but actually it's that the feelings are so close, they're indistinguishable to most people.
Well, it is. I mean, empowerment to me is it's a psychological thing, right? So what you're trying to do is psychologically empower people. You can empower by financial education as well. I mean, there's different theories of empowerment. As I say, going back to my postgrad days, that was my postgrad dissertation, looked at Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation. So like the word consultation is banned in the programme. We don't use it. I insist that we do not use it. It's all about participation and engagement. And as I say, capacity building, you know, consultation is, as you say, Carol, it hasn't been done very well, maybe in planning in Ireland, but that's not what we're about. We're about the Aarhus Convention. We are about public participation.
Well, I am in defence, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here, but in defence of consultation, I do believe that public consultation has moved on. And in fact, just you referenced there Arnstein's ladder of participation. We've actually just done a body of work to try almost bring that into the technological age. So actually that's being rolled out on social media at the moment. Basically what this ladder of participation looks like when we can integrate it with emerging technologies like augmented reality and things like that. So it's amazing. The foundational principles still stand.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, some of the old theories are the best. And I mean, Sherry Arnstein, definitely. I mean, that ladder of participation has been my guiding light throughout my working life.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it occurs to me, Ali, that from the time you designed this program to now, a lot of factors have converged to make your work a lot more difficult. So, I mean, not just the housing crisis, not just our, I suppose, failure to deal with vacancy in the way that most people would have liked to have seen it dealt with. We've got changes in retail. And then, of course, COVID, which has brought some behavioural changes. So actually, from the time you sat down and designed this programme, there had to be changes made to accommodate the last few years.
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about COVID, because I suppose I was getting the surveys that we were doing maybe in Dundalk and Tralee. I'm thinking that was around 2019. And it was very clear that a lot of those towns were not digitally, online. They were not selling online. There was no presence online. So, when lockdown started then in March 2020, I was actually really upset because I knew that these towns were really going to get hit hard. And if you look at Sligo as well, we obviously published the Sligo CTCHC. I think it was in 2020. We had a lot of the work done. But the surveys in Sligo, a lot. Sligo is very unique in terms of the online spend is massive. It's huge, and it's not on websites that are Sligo-based websites. So, it's about, I suppose, trying to get that message through to the policymakers. And that was why, it was so important that the Town Centre First policy had to come in. And then, as you can remember, it took a bit of time for that policy to be prepared. And all of us who are working together since 2016 were very frustrated, that the Town Centre First, to me, there was an urgency. And I think that urgency is still there critically. And I'm not sure if that is, I'm not sure if that's being heard all the time, because we still don't have the data sets that were required at a macro level. I put out, I think, a tweet yesterday on Twitter, whatever, saying, we had met with the Department of Housing in 2018, myself, Space Engagers, Dr. Philip Crowe, Tom Gilligan of vacanthomes.ie and the Housing Agency. And we had presented and pitched a proposal that we had worked up and spent many, hours working up, thinking about it and preparing the document about how to do a digital macro vacancy database. And we didn't really get much sort of hearing, and that was 2018. So yeah, I do think that policymakers need to listen. They really do. And going back to what we were talking about there about participation, practitioners like myself who are dyed-in-the-wool believers in capacity building and, empowerment and bringing places on. And when you say bring a place on, you mean the community as well. And there's no point, places are not places without people. But I do think that the policymakers need to shift towards that. And also with the Green Deal and directives coming from Europe in June, building passports, we need to get ready. There's a whole wave, there's a whole change in how things are going to be done in Europe, and Ireland needs to shift. To me, that's the exciting opportunity for us to do it all collectively together. But I suppose what I would really say, and I was saying this, to UCD recently as well, that I just wish that policymakers would listen to practitioners who are trying their hardest to get on board with this European cultural shift, the move towards the new European Bauhaus, all of those things that to me are just really, really exciting.
Ali, if the policymakers aren't listening to the practitioners and they're not listening to the community, how are they shaping policy?
Well, I just think that maybe, the ecosystem needs to be richer. Okay. So, I'm looking at it, my background's economics, so I'm kind of looking at it in a strategic way. So you're looking at, other countries, what do they have? Scotland's got 40 business improvement districts. Okay. We've got 3 town centre bids in this country. We've got Drogheda, Dundalk and Sligo, and then we've got Dublin Town, which is a city bid. And then I believe there's a bid out in Sandyford Business Park. So, if you're talking about historic town cores, we've got 3, right? Also, Scotland's got Scotland's Towns Partnership, which we already said we don't have in Ireland, okay? So we don't have the 40 bids, even though we've had legislation in the country since 2006. So, we need a strategy for bids. We need to look at the Dutch model. They're actually moving ahead. They've now got community improvement districts, which, going back to what we were saying, it's not just about businesses, it's bringing the communities in as well. And that to me would speak to a more sort of holistic approach where you're trying to get people back into your town centres. So it's commercial, retail, it's civic, it's residential, it's everything together. So yeah, the Dutch with their community improvement districts. Also data. Where are you without the data? We really do need to play catch up and create those dashboards. The European Commission's Eurocities initiative is really pushing digital dashboards. It's something that the CTCHC programme has been advocating for several years. They still don't exist. The beauty of the digital and getting all that sort of information so that the community can look at the data and have the data, and the business leaders it's something that I fundamentally believe in and have been talking about again. You know, it's about the democratization of data. We have to get that data out there. And when we create the data, so the data that we have in the CTCHC program is primary data. We have created it by doing the surveys and doing the mapping with the business leaders and the community leaders walking with us, walking around the towns, doing that mapping. We don't charge for our data. We're trying to add value to our systems and to our decision making. And that's a fundamental, that it is about the democratization of data.
I agree with you absolutely that we need to know the information before we can act on it. But I suppose I'm conscious that you're doing this across such a range of towns. So, you know, maybe just before we wrap up, we might just kind of get specific about one particular area. So you mentioned that you've a report due to issue on Killrush. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So that's a place where I think most people, you know, who have visited there, you know, over the last number of years will be quite shocked. You know, there's a very obvious level of dereliction in the town and vacancy, which is a shame. And I used to live in Listowel, so we would get the ferry across to Killimer and come up through Kilkee and Killrush. And Killrush has some of the most beautiful traditional shop fronts. You know, it's a very Instagrammable town. And unfortunately, most of them are empty. You know, you're seeing the occasional new bakery or coffee shop or something like that. But in terms of a thriving town centre, like what kind of specifics were you able to uncover there?
Well, I mean, obviously it's trying to get that baseline. Okay, so phase 1 of the CTCHC program is to create that baseline with the 15 steps. And then phase 2 is looking at, you know, the building condition. So I have a methodology which we're just about to pilot in Tipperary. So yeah, going back to Killrush, absolutely beautiful, such a pretty town. But I mean, you would know with the market square, maybe, you know, it's been taken over by cars. I mean, a lot of our towns, particularly historic cores, were designed and built and the form and fabric was created before cars. Okay, so I think we need to sort of get back to that thinking. And those places, you know, are shared spaces. Historic shared spaces, you know, so again, the car wasn't there. You know, you've got your sort of laneways and slips and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I do think, you know, the market house in the middle of Killrush, we need to have some kind of flagship project where that public space is designed to the best of our ability. Okay, so it really is about design, urban design, and making sure that those buildings, you know, we can't. One of the things for me, the frustration is there's been a lot of public realm improvements, and you sort of think, okay, are we just going to keep doing the public realm and not look at the buildings? I mean, it's all one. It should be, you know, that to me, again, going back to the sort of crafting of our town centres, you know, it's like an art, okay? And we need to get back to that. We need to get back to the creativity and talking to the civic leaders, the business leaders about the stories of the families that were in the building so we can understand the cultural significance. Again, I think, you know, we did a visual a few years ago about the data gaps, the macro gaps, right, at a national level. So, you know, obviously there's not enough information on vacancy. A lot of the times we can't identify who the owners are, but fundamentally the cultural significance of those buildings, of those streets, of those places, of those historic town cores. We have lost that story. We've lost that connection. And I think during lockdown, a lot of people reconnected because they were sort of slowing down. They were walking around their towns. There was no cars, as many as there would be because people weren't commuting anymore. So people did reconnect with their built heritage. And with those small towns in a way that, again, you were asking me earlier, I mean, that to me is one of the opportunities of the lockdown. So the lockdown hasn't all been negative. People have definitely felt, you know, I suppose it was maybe a psychological thing as well, that people wanted to reconnect with their place. But also, which was really lovely for me, was that the diaspora then started to get in touch as well, you know, because they wanted to get in touch or, you know, reconnect with their places. So yeah, it's all been very, very good. And Killrush, definitely, that's the first step. They're delighted. They were saying it was the best project that they'd worked on last year was the CTCHC. Clare County Council as well have been an enormous support. And it's really just trying to harness what we've learned and how do we take them on then through to phase 2.
Are there examples of towns, small rural towns in Ireland, or you know, ones that maybe previously would have been market towns that are really thriving? You know, do we have any examples of towns that are doing this well?
Yeah, well, I mean, Dundalk with their business improvement district, Martin McElliott has been working, really earnestly and diligently up there all through lockdown. So, I mean, Dundalk has definitely, it's been on some journey because, when I met Martin, I think I was introducing him to the planners and the local authority. It was, again, making those connections. I think a lot of the stuff is about connections, right? Which, Irish people are very, very good at. And again, one of the things I would love to see is like a minister for networks, where everybody can be sort of networked. There's another town then, Feathered and Tipperary, which I was working with the Irish World Towns Network, which I set up a few years back before the CTCHC. Trying to think, Letterkenny, has got, like, really what you need is a decent chamber and you need a decent bid. Okay, so I mean, those towns that don't have those chambers, they really need to sit down and think, okay, should we set up a chamber? Should we do something? Because it's very hard for people like myself as a practitioner who loves towns to go in and help people unless if I can't see an entity there that I can work with. That makes it really, really difficult because then I have to try and create it, which maybe loses me maybe about a year and a half. Yeah. So okay. I would say to those towns, you're asking me about, towns are at different speeds. Yeah. And I keep saying to people who are in towns who maybe approach me and say, can you help us? And I say, don't be thinking if you don't do anything that you're standing still, you're not, because another town will help itself. So you actually go backwards. So everybody needs to now work for the good of their towns, for the good of the country, try and crack this housing crisis and make sure that our young people have somewhere decent to live, preferably in our town centres.
Ali, I'm such a huge admirer of the work that you do and that you have been doing since I've known you. I know that you're working away on the chipping away at the policymakers, even if they're not listening in the way that you might like. I know you're chipping away at that. I know you're involving the communities. I suppose for our listeners here who would tend to kind of be more on the industry side of it, you mentioned their town centres cannot be fixed without the private sector. What can they do?
Well, I mean, basically what we need the private sector to do is to work in partnership with ourselves. There's people like, I came from the private sector to this job. I'm a great believer in the private sector. I mean, anything that I've worked on, I'm trying to make sure that we create the conditions where we take the risk out of it, we make things viable, and we make sure that the private sector can come in. For me, what was really, really encouraging in the last 2 years is that the developers started to phone me and sort of say, we're really enjoying, really liking what you're doing, keep going. So yeah, I mean, the more phone calls that I get from developers or business people, that to me is telling me that I'm doing something right.
Okay, delighted. Look, hopefully today, when this goes out to the industry, hopefully that phone will ring again and you'll have more developers and more people who are genuinely passionately committed to creating great places and getting in touch with you to support the great work that you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was Ali Harvey, founder of the collaborative Town Centre Health Check programme within the Heritage Council. We need to take a quick break now. Stay tuned.